And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody. How are you doing? I'm Deborah Zara Kobylt, and joining me today, we have Dr. Lynne Mouw and Dr. Brooke Stillwell, creators of The Life After Kids. Now, anybody out there who has kids who have, gone away to school and then some, right? Gone off, got married, don't see them quite as often. Look, we're all in that same boat. It's tough. So I asked them to join us here today about how do we get through that time in life? Do we actually get through that time in life? And how do we embrace that time in life? Like there are little, there's skills that we can learn on how to do that and get through that lonely feeling. So ladies, thank you so much for joining me.
We're so happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
It's just lovely. And before we even started our show, I said, oh my God, we all have sort of like the same hair. So I thought that was kind of fun. But I have to ask you ladies, why did you even start this Life After Kids? Were you all feeling, kind of empty, lonely? You have great careers, but very often that doesn't fill a void. So tell me how you all got into this.
Yeah, I think for me, it was two things. It was, I could see the writing on the wall that my kids were getting older, and I was feeling that need for something new, maybe a little bit of a shift and a repurpose. That was number one. And number two, I also wanted to design my life in a way that I could be more flexible and maybe be able to visit them when I wanted to, or do different things that me being in my typical space of work would not allow. So between those two things, I think Lynne and I started talking because we've been best friends for over 20 years. And we're like, what could we do together? What's this going to look like? And in understanding that we were both sort of searching for what's next and how do we want our life to look, we thought, well, we could bring this to, if we're having these struggles, so is everybody else, or at least a large portion of every other mom. And so we decided to start the Life After Kids community.
Yeah, I think it's a great story about the power of like two friends coming together. The power of two people is more than 1 + 1 = 11 kind of thing. Because we were on this hike a couple of years ago, and we were just doing our friend thing, just going on a hike and a walk in New Hampshire. And on the way back down, it's just one of those conversations I'll never forget. And I know it's the same for Brooke as well, where we just were sharing this feeling of like, what's next? Like we both had this question, and we came to this realization that we've been feeling it for a while. And then from there, we decided, okay, we're strong, we're powerful, we're gonna figure this out. So why not bring our community along and put this out there and document this? And we have all these solutions that we've found that work for us. Let's share that. And it came from that day and blossomed from there.
Now, Brooke, Dr. Brooke, just before we went on, I said, gosh, it's still hard for me because I came from a big Italian family. Most of my audience knows that. And there was always family around. So when somebody went off to college, it didn't matter. There were 25 other cousins, and aunts and uncles could occupy themselves with that, right? I don't have that out here at all. We moved here for our careers, raised our kids here, and our kids are off. They're in school and beyond. And I'm often looking for, the relative that isn't there. So I very often will feel that void, and I'll feel it. I have good friends. I have work I enjoy. I am married. I have pets, but I still feel like there's a big hole in there. I don't think I'm alone. What do you say to those people? How do you fill that hole? Or maybe you don't, and we just live with it. What do you say?
No, I think that's a really good question. And I don't think the answer is to just live with it. And I think that's probably part of our struggle or issue in this phase of life, because I think we just end up settling and just assume like, oh, because it's common, or I'm not the only one struggling, or this must be what life is supposed to look like now, so I'm just going to settle. And I myself don't think that's the answer, because, if anything, this phase of life is teaching us, it's that time is of the essence, right? Like we want to make every day count. At least I know I do. And so I think it's very important to focus on not just assuming that those voids are natural and need to be there, but focusing on how we can fill them. And I think Dr. Lynne would say the same thing. And this is what we focus on in the Life After Kids community is you need to, a great way to fill that void is by finding new purpose. And when I say new purpose, that doesn't have to mean like, oh, this new career or this new big thing. It could be small things that are bringing you more meaning and bringing purpose to days, a reason to get up, something that you're excited about. And now suddenly you shift that void of wishing you had family around, whether it's your kids still being there or you, like myself, being from a big Italian family and being able to call on mom or your cousin or this or that. But if you can find other ways and other passions that you're excited about, now suddenly those voids feel less. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But how do you suggest doing that? You know, there's groups, there's this, but what do you, you know, when you counsel people or when you do your podcast, I know you have a successful podcast as well, Life After Kids. What do you say to people on how they can help to fill that empty void?
So I'll just jump in. I think that it starts with knowing yourself a little bit better. I mean, that is something that is a little uncomfortable for many of us at this stage because we're so used to focusing on other people and now the spotlight is sort of on us. And I do really feel like that is step 0, is just figuring out a little bit more about how you're wired. Dr. Brooke and I have a quiz that we have on our website that women will go and take. And we have identified, I mean, it's a very broad category of broad categories, but it's super helpful because, for instance, when you learn that you're a remarkable relator, you're specially wired, you love to take care of people. You're that people magnet, you know, your currency is people, right?
Right.
And so I imagine that might be you, Deborah. Maybe you fall in that category. We also have diligent doers. They're very hardwired to get things done. They show love through doing things, right? They're that mom that's like, I've got it all. I'm going to help you get it checked off. They love to stay busy and do things. And then we also have our category of awesome analyzers. They're a little bit more strategic, like they're sort of, they see the future and they can help you plan. They're great planners. And then we have our magnificent motivators. So they're very influential and they're just that person who shows up in the room and kind of can, you know, mobilize a group. So I think it starts with going back to, and before we jump into all those categories, because maybe we'll get into that, but it starts with knowing yourself. And from there, you find out how you're wired and you can, you know, more clearly, with more clarity, get into a lane to help you find that place of purpose.
I like that. You know, it's funny. I looked on your website at that to try and figure where I fit in. And I thought, I think I'm like 3 out of the 4. What if you're sort of a combination person? Anybody can jump in on that one.
Well, I mean, I think that here's the thing. We all have a little bit. I mean, just because this is not what we always say is, and in this, we talk about this in our community as well. And when we work with people, is that a quiz like that, or some of these other tools that we use, are not to put you in a box, right?
Yeah,
and make you this one thing. It's more to understand, kind of open that box and know exactly who you are. But we all have a little bit of all of that in us, right? So to your point, like, you could feel drawn to each of them. That's why taking the quiz and actually doing it will give you some insight. But then you can take it a step further from there. And there's a lot of different tools that we use. Dr. Lynne could speak more to them, that will help you hone in on exactly where you fit more. Because again, as Lynne mentioned, they are broad categories, right? And there's only 4 types. It can be broken down past there, but you just have to do a little more work past that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Brooke, would you?
Yeah, I would just add to it. So I think even just knowing that we're all different helps us have a little bit more grace for each other. So when I hear you tell that story about how you really feel that deep void of missing being a caregiver, some of those clues lead me. That's why I said maybe you're a remarkable relator. And with those women, I always challenge them and ask them, well, you'll never. We won't necessarily have our kids back in our home to care for, but how can you channel that love of caregiving that clearly is something you're gifted at and you love to do? Who in your community can you now care for instead? That might light you up on the inside. They obviously can benefit from what you can give them, whether that's a family with small kids that you can mentor or just be around to, maybe it's a single mom, or there's an elderly person in your neighborhood that could benefit from you coming and checking on them once a week. That is purpose. So I love what Dr. Brooke said a little bit ago, because I think that that term or us talking about you need more purpose can be a little bit overwhelming when you hear it. And it really doesn't need to be something huge, like you're going to set out and save the world, or I'm going to start a business. It doesn't have to be that. It has to be something that when you wake up in the morning, you get excited that you're going to do. And if it's the right thing, you're combining that purpose with your talents or your gifts. So whether that's you're a great caregiver or you're great at getting things done, they kind of come together. And so some of those tools that we talk about just help you ask the right questions.
It does.
The part is that you're on the journey, right? You may never get to that destination of knowing the exact thing to do, but you will have purpose along the way, and you will be getting, some stride with focusing on yourself and giving yourself that permission to look for that and, find that purpose that lights you up again.
It's interesting. After I looked at that, I started to think, one area for me in particular, I often feel like older people are forgotten. There's lots of places for little children to go. They can go to school, and everybody sort of likes to be around little kids, but older people, they're very lonely. And when I took that, I thought to myself, oh, maybe I should be giving there, giving of my time for people where a lot of times can be forgotten. So it was very valuable that you have that on your website. I will tell you, ladies, it might channel you into where you should be. And often where you should be is right here, and you might not be thinking about it, which is why this conversation is so important, because it got me thinking about it. Your website and this conversation got me thinking about it. What about constantly, maybe not constantly, but texting them, calling them once they're gone? What about that? Is that something that it's like, wait for them to call? I mean, what do you think?
Your children, you're talking about our adult children?
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Brooke.
Yeah, I love that question. And I think for me, I think everybody's a little different, but a lot of our community members reach out and asks that very question. It's like, I'm texting my child once a day or once a week, and why aren't they responding? And what do you think is appropriate? And I think the answer is it's different for everyone. And I think it depends on what relationship you had before they left the house and what you're expecting and what they want. There has to be, I don't think there's one right answer for each person, right? But my feeling is it goes back to your own purpose, right?
Right.
Because if you're living your life in a way that requires all your joy and your sole purpose to still be on your kids, and when you hear from your kids and when you talk to your kids, you're probably going to come up a little bit empty. But if you're channeling your energy into finding something more for your own life that's outside of your children, now all of a sudden you might reach out and text them once a day or once a week or whatever that looks like. But because you're not solely focused on that, it's not going to feel as harsh if they don't respond or they get busy. And by the way, if you're out there living your own life and pursuing your own dreams, that's going to be, and Lynne and I have talked about this on our podcast episodes, it's kind of like a magnet for your kids. It's not, they don't have a mom now that's like sitting around like texting them like, when are you going to text me? Why haven't I heard from you? They see you living your life and finding your own joy. And it's almost like a little, sounds weird to say, but in my mind, it's almost like a little playing hard to get when you're dating someone, remember those days? Like it's a little bit like that.
It's a little push and pull, but we don't want to necessarily, manipulate it there or feel like we're having to play games necessarily with your kids. I think it's different for boys and girls, like to your question. So Dr. Brooke has all boys, and I have an older boy and a girl, and I have seen the difference with that. And I think you just have to follow those cues. Although there's some boys who love to text and communicate. And so again, just like looking at your child, like what do they prefer? Like read the room, I think, on that. And then also just the big piece of for yourself, because we can't control what our adult kids do, right? And we get a lot of women who are like, how do I get my kids to want to spend more time? Or that's a big problem in our community. And I think, again, it just comes back to when you have things for yourself that you're excited and energized about, and you're making a contribution, and every day you go out in the world and you feel good about yourself, to Dr. Brooke's point, that makes you very magnetic, and your kids will be drawn to you. So sort of go from that avenue.
You're really getting me thinking, because I remember my mom, after we left, She got involved with the opera and at the theater locally and just all sorts of areas. And I would think, wow, man, she's pretty interesting. I really got to call, although I called her all the time. I have 3 sons. They're not the greatest callers. Maybe one of them is. And as soon as I see this thing ringing, I'm like, oh my God, like I get excited. It's kind of pathetic. I'm just going to sit here and own up to it, and I think, oh, Deborah, come on. And I'll pick up right away. So to your point, maybe I should let it go to ring number 3 or something. So I look like I'm doing something kind of cool and interesting instead of like, I'm right here. I really got to learn these lessons a little better, ladies. And as I said, I actually have a full life and I enjoy what I do. But I think it's a little hard to get that Italian mama out of me. I really do. Sometimes I think about it and I think maybe it's just sort of the way I was raised, where everybody was in everybody's business, which really my kids don't like. They don't want anybody in their business. They're very independent. And I'm like, man, did I make them too independent? So, I have all these conflicts. And because I have them, I know everybody else has them too, which is why your space is a great place to come together and learn. Do you have like group, things that you do with people and get people together to talk about this sort of stuff so we don't feel alone?
Yeah, we have the Life After Kids membership group. So we have live calls there twice a month. It's also a place where you can text and interact with each other, and just, touch base, because at the end of the day, we can feel like we're on an island, I think, in this phase of life. But when we start talking with each other, you realize that we are all going through a lot of very similar things, if not the same things. And sometimes just knowing you're not alone is half the battle, right? Like this conversation we just had about the kids not texting enough or wanting to pick up on the first ring. And when you know that other moms are doing that, you suddenly, it allows you to give a little more grace to yourself and to them, right? And that, okay, I'm not alone in this. This is kids. This is our adult kids living their life and doing their thing. It's not like just mine don't like me. Do you know what I mean?
That is a good point. That is a terrific point, Dr. Brooke, that you made. It's not that they don't like you. They're just living their lives. And in this time, that's what kids do. They're living their lives. And then it's like, oh yeah, mom. Although still, I wish they text more, but that's okay. Go ahead, Dr. Lynne, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no. So we also have a podcast. That we're asking about the avenue. So, we have Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we have a podcast that we download. We drop an episode every week. And we're in the midst of something very exciting, which is we're writing a book where we're compiling all of these ideas and tools and, the things that women can need in this phase of life. We're putting it all together in a book, which will come out next year. So we're very excited about that.
Let's talk about, because I want to give somebody some tools when they leave this podcast, and I know it's complicated, right? This is something where it takes weeks and months until you feel like you've sort of found your ground. But what are some tools that it's like, look, you're feeling down, you're feeling this, you could try this. Can you give us some tools that have worked for the two of you and for people in your community?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think for me, I sort of break down to 3 or 4, depending how you look at it, different areas that I try to focus on in this phase of life to feel my best and fill that void, as you would say. And the first one is purpose, which we just talked about. We can break down more specifically how we go about that, but focusing on something that brings you meaning and something you can do that's contributing back, right? Something that you're doing that makes you feel like you're serving a purpose. That's one. Number 2 is making better friendships and connections is so important. And there's research out from Harvard even saying that the number 1 most important thing for not only our happiness, but our longevity, how long we'll live, is our connections and community. So building those types of things. And then on top of that, and these go hand in hand, you could separate them as 2, but they're probably just one, focusing in on your physical health and then emotional balance with stress management. And when you focus in those 4 areas, and I can give you tools in each, but we have to look at the big picture here, right? And that can seem like overwhelming, but also if you just picked one small thing that you could do in each of those areas to get started, I think you would notice the difference.
Yeah, I think that's...
Sorry, Deb.
No,
I just did a reel about this because, for many of us, we're thinking long-term always, but also it just comes down to how we're feeling each day and wanting to make sure that, we have enough purpose and things in our life to fill that void now that is left behind with our kids not being there. And so just a really practical way to approach it is having one physical win every day. So you have to move your body. You know, it could be a walk. Honestly, and Dr. Brooke is the expert on this, but that will change your mood tremendously. Something as simple as just walking up and down your block every single day. It'll help your spirit to lift, but also just help your body to detoxify and stay healthy. And then just having one mental win. So I love the New York Times puzzle, you know, the Wordle or whatever. I always sit down at a certain time of day and do that. But if you like to read a book, or if you want to read your Bible, whatever it is, train your mind, like stimulate your mind every day, one thing. And then also social wins. So, you know, talking about how important that community is, making sure that you call a friend or text a friend, just reaching out every single day. Be that person that does that, because inevitably that's going to create people reaching back. You know, it usually sets up that way.
You know, and it can be hard, right? We might think like, oh, maybe they don't want to hear from me, or maybe they don't want me in their group, but try anyway, you know, or, you know, there's always a group. I like to say, look inside. Like I love love nature. And sometimes I'll go out and I'm by myself and I'm hiking and I love the ocean. And then I'll think, you know, I want to connect with somebody who's doing this. And I'll say, well, then there's got to be a hiking group. Like you have to do a couple of layers of research, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Find a group that, you know, if you want to start a hobby, but you're not quite sure or you feel scared, find a group that's doing it. That's a great way to build community. And back to your point about, you know, most women are afraid to be that first person to reach out. And honestly, from what we're hearing, like our community of women in this phase of life, it's full of lonely women afraid to make the first move. And so we just do it because, you know, it's batting averages. So even if you send out 10 messages and you get 3 back, hey, you got 3, you know, people that you communicated with, and people are busy. Like the same point to your kids, like it's not that they don't like you. They're just maybe busy doing other things, or they'll get back to you later. But make that move, because that's important for you to step out and take control of that and reach out.
Dr. Brooke, you were going to say something? Yeah, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no, Lynne and I kind of sometimes share a brain. So I was going to say very similar. But yeah, I think you have to take the first step very often. And I think there's 2 things here. Number one, you have to, again, and we just mentioned this earlier in our talk, really know yourself. And I think accept yourself and be authentic, because when you do that, when it comes to making friends, suddenly you attract the right people. Like we're past the point where we are just being who we think everyone else wants us to be to fit in. That's not going to get us what we're craving in this phase of life, which I believe is strong, good, authentic, and real friendship, and people who see us for who we are and love us in spite of and because of who we are, right? And so you have to know who you are and be yourself. And I think communication is key. And again, putting yourself out there and not being afraid to take that first step, just like Lynne said. And again, it's the same as with your kids. If you want your kids to text more, if you want your friends to reach out more, why not start by texting them? Like, we don't need to wait for them to text us, right? You can, and it doesn't have to be a text like, why aren't you texting me? Why haven't I heard from you? Why this, why that? It can be like, how's your day going? Or to a friend, when can we get together for a cup of coffee? Or I've been thinking about you, you know, like how's whatever it is that's going on with them. But if we wait for somebody else to do it for us, it probably is not going to happen. So we can either feel sorry for ourselves and wait, or we can take, you know, control of what's happening in our own life. As Lynne said earlier, we can only control what we do. We can't control what everybody else does. So we can take ownership for our own actions and decide how we want that to look.
Yeah. Dr. Lynne, you wanted to respond to that?
No, I just, a term we throw around a lot is just stay in your zone of control, right? Because so much frustration comes from the place where we're trying to change someone else, whether that's an adult child or our spouse, and we don't have control there. We can't, even if they should be doing something different, it's not right or it's not fair, whatever it is, we can't change their opinions, we can't change their actions, but we can control what we do and what we think.
And you also mentioned being physically active, because a lot of times moms fall out of that, right? And you fall into the trap of not eating great, not feeling great, and then actually picking yourself up and doing something about it. Man, is that hard. I've fallen into that myself. But, nobody's watching. And if you think they are, they're probably not. If they are, who cares? Just do it anyway, because there's no doubt when I feel more physically active, when I am more physically active, I really feel better mentally. And then I want to show up because I feel good, right? That is everything. And to your point, it doesn't have to be a big deal. Just go for a walk around the block wherever you live. That to me is everything. Getting outside, if you can, and just try to walk around the block. It is amazing how much better you feel. Or maybe like go for a cup of coffee at a coffee shop, even if you're alone, and look at people or bring a journal. Like there's a lot of ways that we can try to overcome. Because it's interesting. I always put myself out as an example. Even though I appear to be an extrovert, the truth is I'm really an introvert. So I'll end up at a coffee shop probably, writing and not talking to anybody. And I have to force myself to, just start up a conversation or look at someone in the eye because I tend to be kind of shy about that. So just know who you are, right? Like it's all in here. It's in there. Do you agree? It's right here.
100%. And it's loving what is instead of what isn't, and I think Dr. Brooke mentioned that, but a lot of us still look and compare and say, well, she's got this or she does it that way. And so a huge part of that self-awareness work that we do with our community is helping people to really look and see what is really right about what is and accepting that finally, because when you get to that place, that is a very authentic place. And to your point, similar to physical exercise, when you start it, it sort of begins this snowball effect. It's the same thing with loving yourself. It begins the snowball effect where so many good things just come from that one step that you take.
Also, I think if we look at who we were as children sometimes, what did you love as a child? I often think you go back to that. Do you talk about that with groups as well? Like who were you when you were 5 and 4? What gave you joy? I sometimes think we can go back to that because that's who we really are, right? There were no roadblocks back then, no jobs and all kinds of things getting in the way, hopefully. And that's really where you can also find your joy. Like, who were you? Do you talk about that as well? Dr. Brooke, if you want to answer to that one.
Yeah. So, and Lynne can jump in on this too, but there are a series of questions that we'll have women ask when you're looking for specifically your purpose. And you hit the nail on the head with one of them there, which is, what is it that you love to do as a child? What brought you joy then? Because very often that can be done in a way in your adult life as well. That would be one question to ask for sure. So good. Thank you for bringing that up. Number 2 is, what do you do in your life currently that when you're doing it, time just flies by and you don't even notice how much time's gone? So that's another great question to ask yourself. And then I think another question is to ask, what are you passionate about? And that's an important question when you're looking for purpose in this phase of life, because just because you're good at something doesn't necessarily mean that's what you should be doing and what's going to light you up. So I think it's important to ask the follow-up question, what am I passionate about? Especially if you're looking for a purpose in this phase of life that goes beyond just, paying your bills and, making sure you're getting your day-to-day things. If you're looking to take the next step of what's going to bring me the most fulfillment and the most meaning, that's a very important question to ask as well. And Dr. Lynne, I'm sure you have some questions to add to that. Yes or no?
Yeah, I just think the other clue, we call that clue to purpose, right? Clues to finding your purpose. The other clue would be things that you are really like, you start something and you pick it up really fast. For instance, for me, it's not pickleball.
Me neither.
Some people might start that and, you're with a group and they're like, wow, Jeannie, you're so good at that. That's a sport example, but it also could be, assisting preschoolers in a literacy program or something that you dive into. And all of a sudden you find that, wow, I'm really picking this up super fast. So that would also be another clue. I love going back to your point, Deborah. I mean, especially for hobbies, like start there. Finding your purpose can be a little overwhelming, especially for brand new empty nesters. Just pick up a hobby or two that you loved as a child. Think back with like, oh, I haven't had time. I want to get back to that. Pick that up and start there. That's a great place to like sort of, pull the thread on and follow along to find the places where you find things.
And it doesn't have to be a big deal, ladies. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be like shopping and finding a fabulous outfit. It doesn't have to be any of that. It really can be as simple as, wherever you live, if you live in a city or a small town, walking into town, grabbing coffee, like really small stuff. And then I think when you allow yourself and you have time to think, because I've been there, right? And things come to you, right? If you allow it, it just comes. And I also think not trying to fit into a group where you don't belong. Don't you think that's a big one? Oh Lord, we've all been there, right?
Huge.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
huge.
a big part of this phase is also just letting go, right? Let go to rise and letting go of what isn't suiting you or serving you. And that's an honest moment. And that takes some reflection, so that, truthfully, it's not a case of, okay, this pushes me outside of my comfort zone, right? Where I'm afraid and I sort of want to take a step back, but it's actually good for me. You have to know the difference. You have to discern, or, this is really toxic, or I'm not growing any longer in this group, or whatever, gauge it according to growth. If this is something that's growing you, even if you're scared, stick with it. You'll get through that sort of rough patch, hopefully, and get through this whole area of growth. But if you're not growing, if you're stagnant, if you just feel like it's time for a change, that's how you know to sort of shed that.
Did you have a comment to that, Dr. Brooke, or are you good?
No, I couldn't agree with Dr. Lynne more. And I think that, same as you said, it just is so important. Yep.
Yeah, you do have to know yourself. We've all tried, especially when we had kids, we've all tried to fit into that mom group. I was never really in the cool mom group. That's just not who I am. I'm sort of a nerd who likes to read and who likes to go off on hikes alone. But I always would think, man, how cool it would be to be in that cool group. You try and fit in, and it doesn't work. Didn't work then, and it doesn't work now, ladies. And it didn't work for your kids either.
No.
We all know that. So if you're trying to, just forget about it. Go off on your own, and I think then it will come. I know what that feels like, right? It's painful to feel like you're by yourself and your kids are gone. You're thinking, is there anybody out there? And there is, right?
Yeah, we talk a lot about introversion and extroversion, because that is something near and dear to my own heart as well. And I heard some of your similar, like hearing you talk, it's nice to have someone else open up about that. So, because as I'm listening, I feel that too. And really, I think we can attach labels to our introversion, extroversion that really don't need to be there. It's really just how we recharge, right?
How we are. Yeah.
Get drained a little bit versus the extroverts who get, built up by being around people. But what happens with introverts is we don't take the time to invest in our relationships. And then when we do feel like because we're all human creatures, we need that social interaction. We look around and we go, oh, there's nobody here. And that's where right? So back to the point of, as an introvert, you can still have your downtime, but you will need to take some steps to send the text, send the invite, host the party. Don't do it on a frequency that's going to stress you, but make that a priority so that you build up and invest in those relationships.
You two are adorable, by the way, and you've known each other 20 years. I mean, your relationship is adorable, because you're right. You say one thing and the other one finishes the sentence. I'm like, wow. That's amazing. That's a real couple there. That's a real friendship. You met in school. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been over 20 years now. I think we're getting close to 25. We're closer to 25 than we are to 20.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And we fight like sisters.
So, and you met in chiropractic school, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. We did. Yeah. And our husbands are best friends. I mean, and our kids have grown up together. So there's a lot of overlap. I think a lot of this work with self-awareness is really and truly like what Dr. Brooke and I use to get to know ourselves, but to know each other. And it's been really, really important as we work together to know, because we are very, very different, believe it or not, even though when we come together, we can finish each other's sentences. We're very, very different. But I know I've learned so much about who she is and what she needs. we don't always get it right. And it waxes and wanes, right? There's periods where, we're really in sync and periods when we're not. But for the most part, I know who she is, what she needs, and how to support her as a friend. And I think she would say the same. And it's just come from that work and giving that to ourselves first so that we can be our own best friend first. Then you can be, a good friend to others.
That's just beautiful. I love that. And I love your sweaters too, because you don't even live near each other anymore, right? But,
Never really have. Never really have. It's always been a long distance friendship.
Wow, that's really neat. So remember those long distance friendships, girls. One of my absolute best friends is in New York. We met in college and we're still as close as can be. We're also as different as can be. But so don't forget those long distance ones too. So, all right, you've got the podcast, you've got the book coming out next year. I'm looking forward to that very, very much. It's going to be great. Hopefully go on a book tour and we can meet. You do talks, you have the membership that people can join, which I think is very, very valuable, ladies. What about a travel group? Wouldn't that be great? Something where it's not like such a big deal where everybody's spending tens of thousands at the Ritz-Carlton, but just something like lovely to get together. Have you thought about doing any kind of travel groups for ladies?
I think you need to join. I think you need to join with us on that.
Maybe we'll talk about it. Wouldn't that be fun? It doesn't have to be like, trip to Australia. It's like, oh my God, keep it simple. Something that's beautiful and nice and casual for people to get to know each other, as opposed to all the fancy accoutrements, right? The goal is to get to know each other. Oh, we should talk about that. That'd be fun. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. And, and here's the thing about that, and Lynne and I have been discussing that, but we're focused on getting the book done first. And then that will probably very likely be the next step, because it's one of the biggest things we hear from moms is that they're feeling lonely, right? Because the friends that you had that were connections when your kids were still in your home were likely because they were the parents of your kids' friends. And that was the common denominator. When the kids shift away, then maybe that common denominator is not there, and you find that you're not as close friends or you don't keep connections. So we're all struggling with loneliness. And it's one thing, I think, to get together in our membership community or to talk online and to talk like we are. But it takes it to a whole nother level when you can actually get in person with people. And connect in that way. And so I do believe there's a huge need for that. And I think it would be a lot of fun to do something like that.
Yeah, not only would you have like the community of the other attendees, but we'd also have a day or two or however long to go really in deep with some of this material and help people workshop and help each other in groups and sort of pull out our collective wisdom that's in a group of women. To help us all, thrive more. That's the goal.
It is. And we're all in it together, everybody. Still to come, right? Still to come. I love this. And I really enjoy talking with both of you so much. Anything else you want to add to our interview that I didn't ask you or that you'd like that our people to know?
I think one more thing that came to mind, because we did talk a lot about friendship and connection, and we talked about the authenticity piece, and we talked about taking the first step and having enough courage to put yourself out there. But I think the one missing piece that is so, so important that we did not talk about is just allowing yourself to be vulnerable and sharing your vulnerability with other people. And that could be with your kids. That could be with, if you have this, sorry, my dog's barking. That could be with friends as well. That's usually the first step to friendship. It often can be. So
you're right. Be vulnerable. Say it again. I'm sorry, Dr. Lynne.
I would just add the other piece, be vulnerable for sure. The other piece is you have something so unique, so special, no matter who you are in this world. We can produce statistics if you need them. I have the data. You are completely unrepeatable. Like what you have as a collection of your particular talents has never been and never will again. And so even though you're not full-time mothering, you have all of this amazing all of these amazing gifts to still give out to the world. So just be thinking about who you can help so that you can get as much back by giving, because it's truly, until you do that and you if we've all volunteered or we've helped a friend, when you do that, you get as much back as you give. And so just keeping that contribution piece and making sure we don't settle, that we are still vibrant and, you know, wanting to give of our time and our talents.
Beautifully said. And something to end our interview on as well. I so appreciate the two of you joining me. I feel a real connection with both of you. Dr. Lynne Mouw, Dr. Brooke Stillwell, please look up Life After Kids. Look up the podcast, look up the website, the book to come, and then some, right? Maybe we'll all be traveling together, ladies. We'll see what happens in the future.
Never know.
Right? That could be a lot of fun. The possibilities are endless, but just if you're feeling alone, I just really mean that. Find one thing that you enjoy, that you feel like you could pick yourself up and go out there. You just never know what you'll find. And don't give up either, right? Because we've all been there. Even if it looks like we haven't, we have. So thank you both very, very much for joining us. And please look them up, Life After Kids. And you can find our podcast, Deborah Kobylt Live, on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram. We'll post our promos. And then, of course, as an audio podcast, wherever you get your podcast, please look up Deborah Kobylt Live, and you'll find our interview with Doctors Lynne and Brooke. And I love the dog back there. I'm a big animal person. I love him. My little Leo's right next to me. So I love him. So anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to next time.